The ZX80. Are games on this thing a thing? Well, yes they are. A system with even less power than a ZX81? Yes indeed, but now it's in colour. Let me explain. The ZX80 was the predecessor to the now more or less legendary ZX81, released the year before in 1980. On the surface, these machines seem to be very similar, the same completely monochrome text-based graphics, the same tiny, even then 1K of memory, and the same total lack of sound. Like the ZX81, its major selling point was price, an almost fully functional computer for less than £100. You could even buy it in kit form for just $79.95. So why is it worse than a ZX81? Well, apart from its keyboard, which makes the ZX81 look like an IBM Model M, slightly more reliable than beaming characters into the RAM with the power of your mind, but not much. Yes, apart from that, it had another little flaw. And I'm not talking about the overheating problems either. Sinclair Research learned the hard way that painting air vents on the case doesn't work quite as well as actually cutting holes in it. No, I'm talking about the flicker. Yes, as this thrilling footage from some early titles shows, the ZX80 had problems in displaying any sort of graphics at all. Thanks to the primitive video generation circuitry it used, it could either display graphics and wait for further input, or it could run program code, but not both at the same time. This put any sort of action game completely off the table to begin with anyway, and the ZX80's early software was barely much more than utterly simplistic. The stuff on this 8-game compilation from Bramwell Enterprises sums it all up pretty well, though it does have handy title announcements on the tape.
Number 8, second version of Slot Machine Program.
Ah yes, the white-hot heat of 1980s technology. I don't think I'm related, but I couldn't rule it out. As fascinating as this no doubt was to people who'd never seen a computer before, it all seems hopelessly quaint now, but things were to pick up on the ZX80 with the advent of the all-new flicker-free technology. Developed by Macronix Software and announced in late 1980, this breakthrough allowed the ZX80 to display animated graphics, very much like its successor the ZX81 would be able to do. This Breakout clone from Macronix was possibly the first game to show off this revolutionary technique. Maybe not one of gaming's all-time greats, but something like this running on a totally stock and unexpanded ZX80 was an incredible achievement. So how does this flicker-free magic work? Well, the ZX81 had the same problem as the ZX80. It couldn't both display graphics and run code at the same time, but some extra circuitry in the new machine, a non-maskable interrupt generator in fact, allowed it to operate in what was called slow mode and switch between the two tasks seamlessly, making animated video possible. The ZX80's weakness was that it lacked this extra circuitry, but Macronix found a way of simulating it in software. Space Intruders was the next work on the ZX80 from this company, the deluxe edition on display here requiring a 3K RAM expansion. An even more slimmed down 1K version existed as well. Yes, now we're really flying. The marvel of flicker-free graphics applied to something a little more complex. But why was all this necessary? Other machines never had this problem, did they? Well, the trouble was the brilliantly clever and cost-saving design that both machines used in creating their video output. The CPU in these machines is completely occupied when graphics are being drawn, the system's designers using an ingenious hack to get the CPU in help cycling through the graphics data to be displayed. This means that the only time the processor has free is in that brief window between one video frame being drawn and the next one appearing on the screen, known as the vertical blank interval. On the ZX81 this was handled automatically, but writing flicker-free games on the ZX80 is a lot more difficult. It means writing very tight blocks of code that can fit into this short window before the CPU is again hijacked, something that Macronix with these two games pioneered. It's an immense tribute to these guys, Ken MacDonald and Ron Bissell, that they managed to discover this technique at all, let alone turn it into the ridiculously tightly crafted programs that they did. Especially as this trick seemed to appear before the ZX81 launched, not just trying to ape its successor, but striking out in entirely new ground. Once the cat was out of the bag, a number of other games followed in the same vein. A reliable estimate puts this at a couple of dozen, many of them now seemingly lost, but this next one is still with us thankfully. QS Defender by Quicksilver. A very stripped down version of the Williams arcade classic, this is in all likelihood the only attempt at any sort of horizontal scrolling game on this system. Simple? Well, yes it is, but it is very fast and responsive and much more playable than what you might expect on this achingly low-spec computer. Quicksilver obviously had mastered the flicker-free technology, but there's more, because this is something that no other ZX80 game had as far as I can tell. It's got sound. Making use of Quicksilver's own sound interface, this game is accompanied by some fairly pleasingly appropriate noises to go along with the action. This interface added the then state-of-the-art AY chip, used in dozens of systems in the 80s, including the Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum, MSX and many others. When this popped up in 1981, you'd probably struggle to find better sound on any home system until the C64 launched a year later. It's a shame that no other game made use of it, but these proprietary add-ons never seem to get much traction, do they? This is good enough that it could easily pass for a ZX81 game for what that's worth, and well, that's exactly what it did, being re-released not long after, slightly modified for compatibility, but otherwise unchanged. What remains of the ZX80's surviving library from this period is pretty much more of the same. Double Breakout from Beam Software is a very slightly enhanced take on the Breakout formula. Yes, this time it's sideways and there are 2 rows of bricks. I don't want to seem too dismissive though, getting any sort of functional game at all on this system required its limits to be pushed pretty hard, and there's so little software to be had that all ZX80 releases have something unique and interesting about them. This computer, after all, had a very short life on the market for just 12 months, replaced entirely by the ZX81, and no surprise really, its successor was basically the same thing but better. Cheaper for the consumer, but also cheaper for Sinclair to manufacture as well, requiring fewer integrated circuits despite its improved feature set. With the 81 on the shelves, there was no reason for the 80 to carry on, and it was quickly discontinued. But even the ZX81 barely made it to the mid-80s as a viable machine though, very quickly looking like a wind-up gramophone in the age of the Discman, the ZX80 wilting from memory even sooner. Much like this plug for my Patreon, which I'm going to insert here. Click the appropriate link or head to patreon.com/Chiropolis if you'd like to help me out. This could easily be the end of the story, but of course it's not. This is the 21st century, when retro enthusiasts are keen to give even the most primitive of our digital forebears a chance to show what might have been. So let's take a look at Mazogs, or Mazogs, or... I don't think there's a way that I can say this to please the pedants in the audience. Actually, you'll find it's pronounced Mazogs, Chiropolis. I can't believe you'd make such a stupid error. Anyway, one of the ZX81's best remembered releases, a very primitive action RPG, but strangely engaging. 5 minutes with this and it's not hard to see why it might still spark some nostalgia, an original game with an old school gameplay loop that still might have some pull for fans of the early days of home computing. But this never appeared on the ZX80, did it? Well, it didn't until 2016, when it was dragged down a level by ancient microcomputer maestro Paul Farrow. Disassembling the game and converting it to use flicker-free routines. This is basically an identical version of the original brought to the lower spec machine. A process that can't have been easy, requiring parts of the game's code to be optimised, or in some cases padded out, to fit in the tight window that all the code must be crammed into. If you've seen my ZX81 video, the name Paul Farrow might be familiar. He's the guy who did the fantastic Against the Elements for that system, a game that pushes it about as hard as it can be pushed on the original hardware. Could Against the Elements appear on the ZX80? Well, no, sadly there's no chance of that whatsoever, and I know that because I asked the man himself. Even with the most skilled programming, the ZX80 just doesn't have enough processing time to pull off what the ZX81 did in that regard. But what about the colour? Where does that come in? Wasn't that promised at the top of this vid? Well, yes it was, and here it is. Let's take a look at Kong. Created by guess who? Paul Farrow, this is a graphically simplified but otherwise very feature-complete version of the classic Donkey Kong that makes use of the brand new Chroma 80 interface, making the ZX80 bizarrely polychromatic. The Chroma 81 interface did the same thing for the ZX81, and now it's making its way to its older, less quick on the uptake brother. The 80 version is not quite ready for delivery yet as I put this out, but it should be on its way by the end of 2020, the old Rona having slowed things down a bit. This new version of the interface will be with us soon. Kong originally appeared in monochrome back in 2011 and by itself was a bit of a marvel, a very playable incarnation of this game on a very limited machine, but the new version of course adds the extra graphical zing. Also from the same source is a full colour version of Pacman, again an amazing port, not the finest version of Pacman you'll play but incredible for the system. Both of these games are now available on cassette via Cronosoft, link in the description, at a very reasonable £6. Both are also ZX81 compatible if your budget doesn't quite run to the massively collectible original machine, and both, interestingly, are also run games that even show some loading feedback, unique features in the ZX80 library I believe. The Chroma 80 interface should cost roughly the same as the Chroma 81 interface at £72 or around $95 plus shipping, but for more details have a look at Paul's website, the ZX Resource Centre, which I'll link to below. Well, I think that's going to be about it for now. There's not much more to say on the ZX80 at the present time. It's weird how far things have been pushed. I was really expecting this to be a very short video, not expecting to see much of anything, but I was definitely wrong and there may well be more to come. What about high res? That was one of the 81's finest flourishes. Can El 80 do the same thing? Well, yes it can. In fact, it probably got there first. Could it be combined with the Chroma 80's colour? Yes indeed. Has anyone made a game like that? Well, not yet, but watch this space. So farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies. Extra special thanks to Paul Farrow for his help in this video, and of course thanks to my Patreons, and I'll see you next time folks.